Hey everyone, in this video we're going to take a look at part 39 from the Hercules story from Ritchie's Fabulae Faciles. Now this chapter is called Charon's Ferry. So you want to remember at this point in the narrative, Ritchie has taken a pause. We're going to be talking about the underworld and getting Kerberos, the hellhound, out, but he took a pause to tell you more about the underworld and kind of how it all works. So that's what we're seeing in this chapter. We're going to be learning a little bit more about Charon, the boatman, the river Styx, and kind of how dead Greeks get to the underworld, right? How are you supposed to make it? A little bit more about how the underworld works, okay? So you've probably heard about this. It's a fun sort of chapter to look at just because it ties in so much mythology and things you might know. Maybe you don't. If you've never heard of this before, of course, please go look it up. But it should kind of give you a little bit of a visualization of things you've probably heard of before. So before we dive in, like I always tell you, the first thing you want to do is get the vocab under control. So you can either find a commentary, or make your own vocab list. But one way or another, you want to do a little bit of pre-reading and get that vocab so that you're ready to go. It's really hard to translate if you don't know what the words mean. You're just kind of it's a non-starter, right? You won't be able to read this. So get the vocab, memorize it. And then once you're ready to read, make sure you're reading it aloud. I always tell you, if you can find a classmate, someone you can read the story to work on your speaking, your pronunciation, then they can read it back to you. And now you can work on your listening skills. These are all great things where sort of reading happens, not just translating in your head. You want to do that to bring the language to life. You never want to shut off your sort of speaking and listening parts of your brain. Because that might be how you learn, right? So you don't want to just read this in your head. The other advice I'd give you is use the read and reread method. You hear me say this in almost all my videos, but it works. You read through the story once, write down any problem areas you have, go look them up. If it's vocab, it's really easy. You just look up in the dictionary what the word is. If it's grammar, it can be a little bit trickier, but you can find a commentary or look up the grammar and try to kind of figure it out on your own. But one way or another, get the grammar, get any vocab you're not sure of, and then go back and read the story again. And you keep doing that as many times as you need to until eventually you hit a point where you can read through this entire thing. You understand all of it or pretty close to all of it. You don't need any vocab help, any grammar help, anything like that. That's how you know you're in a really good position and you're ready to move forward, okay? So if you haven't done that yet, go do it, pause the video, go do this work on your own and come back. But at this point, we're going to move forward. I'm going to assume that you've done that, and you can use the rest of the video just as sort of a double check to make sure that you're on the right track. Not that my translation is perfect, but hopefully it kind of gives you a little bit of a guide so you can feel comfortable to move on, okay? So the chapter starts like this. You have de orco, qui idem hades appellebator, haec traduntur. So about Orcus, right, which is another word for the underworld, right? About Orcus, which is also called Hades, right? That's probably the more familiar name you've heard, Hades, right? But Orcus, Hades, same thing, the underworld. You have haec traduntur. These things are literally handed down, but you might translate it, these things are reported. Okay, so Ritchie is going to tell you a little bit about Hades, or the underworld. Then you have ut quisque de vita de caserat manes eus ad orcum sedem mortuorum ad deo mercurio deducebantur. So when anyone, right, quisque, when anyone had de caserat, had departed from life, de vita, it's sort of a fun euphemism for dying, right? So when anyone had died, literally departed from life. Then you have manes eos. So manes can mean a spirit. I like the translation shade just because of sort of the metaphor of it, that it's sort of you but not you. You're a shade of yourself. So I'll use shade as my translation for manes. You can use spirit, however you want to think of it. But it says when someone or anyone had departed from life, his shade or their shade, deducebantur, there we go, was led down by the god Mercury, right? Ad deo mercurio, ad orcum, to Orcus, right? And Ritchie describes Orcus or Hades as the sedem mortuorum, right? The seat or the home of the dead. Okay, so that's what we know. It's the underworld. And notice this is a function of Mercury. You've probably heard this before if you're up on your mythology. If not, maybe you didn't realize this, but that's Mercury's job, right? He brings people to the underworld. He's not just the messenger god. He's also that sort of guide to get you your soul or your shade to the underworld. And then he kind of leaves, right? That's really his only function here. Okay. Then you have huius regionis, quae sub terra fuisse dicitor, rex erat Pluto, cui uxor erat Proserpina, Iovis et Cereris filia. Okay, so of this region, okay, which is said, dicitor, right, which is said to have been sub terra, under the ground, right, fuisse to have been. So which is said to have been under the ground. Of this region, the rex, the king, so in other words, the king of this region was Pluto. Okay, you've heard this before. Pluto, Hades, however you want to think of it, right? So Pluto is just the Roman name. So the king was Pluto, whose wife, Kui, right? So whose wife was Proserpina, or Persephone in Greek, right? So Proserpina is the queen of the underworld. There's an image over here, right? And it's Proserpina, the Philia, the daughter of Jove, right? Jupiter, and Ceres. Okay, so these are the famous characters. You have Pluto and Proserpina as the king and queen of the underworld. Then you continue, you have manes igitur a Mercurio deducti primum ad ripam veniebant stigis fluminis quo regnum Plutonis continetur. Okay, so therefore shades, manes, right? Shades, deducti, having been led down a Mercurio, by Mercury, they first came when Iebot, right? They first came to the Ripam, the river bank, and it's the bank of the Stigis Fluminus, of the river Styx, right? This is the famous river of the underworld. So first you get led down to the bank of the river. Okay, and it's the river quo by which rather the regnum Plutonus, the realm of Pluto, continentor, right? Continentor means is contained. So in other words, it's sort of the boundary of the underworld. So you show up and you go to the river Styx, and this is where you're about to kind of cross into Pluto's domain and the domain of the underworld. Okay, then you have hoc transire necesse era antequam in orcum venire posse. Okay, so it was necessary, necesse erat, it was necessary to cross over this river before they were able, meaning the shades, remember the manes, before they were able to come into Orcus. So in order to get into Hades or Orcus, the underworld, the first thing you have to do is you have to cross over the river Styx. Okay, but you can't just swim across. We're going to see how this actually happens. Then you have cum tamen in hoc flumine nullus pons factus esset manes transvehebantur caronte quodam qui cum parva scafa ad ripam expectabat. So since, however, right, you have this cum clause. So since, however, nullus pons, so no bridge, factus esset, was made in hoc flumine, on this river. So there's no bridge across the river Styx. So because, or since there's no bridge, manes, the shades, transvehebantur, they were carried across by a certain Caronte, by Charon, right? This is the ferryman of the underworld, okay? So you get carried across by Charon on a boat, right? And it's Charon who, qui, right? We're getting a little more information about him with the relative clause. So who, expectabat, who is waiting ad ripam, at the riverbank, right? With his parva scafa, with his small boat, his little, it's usually like a little skiff or a raft or whatever, right? This small little boat. He doesn't have a big boat. He kind of rows you across, a rowboat, I guess is the word I'm looking for. And you can see that in the image here, right? Different depictions of Charon and sort of the ferry that he has across the river. Then it continues, and you have Charon pro hoc officio mercedem postulabat, neque quemquam nisi hoc premium prius dedisset transvehere volebat. So Charon, in return for, right, pro works best here is in return for this service, hoc officio, right? In return for this service, meaning getting you across the river, he asked for mercedem, a payment. Right, so you don't get to do this for free. He's looking for basically money, right? You gotta pay in order to get across. He doesn't just do this out of the sort of the kindness of his heart. Okay, so in return for the service, you gotta pay. Okay, and not anyone, quemquam. So literally no one. And then you have a side note, unless he had given this price before, right, in advance, I guess is kind of the idea. So in other words, unless you've already paid, is kind of the idea here, unless he had, not given it, right? So unless you've paid the price in advance beforehand, he did not want he didn't want to cross over, to carry across anyone. So in other words, it's saying unless you've paid in advance, Charon doesn't take you across the river. Okay, so you got to show up with some cash, otherwise he's leaving you on the bank and you're not making it. Okay. Then it continues on, and you have quam ob causam mos era apud antiquos numum in ore mortui ponere eo concilio ut cum ad stigem venisset pretiam trajectus solvere posse. So for which reason, means kind of like on account of which reason. It was custom, mos era, right? It was a custom among the ancients, apud antiquos, right? Among the ancient people, it was custom to put, ponere, to put a numum, a coin, in ore mortui, in the mouth of the dead person, right? The mortui, right? Whoever is dead. So you've probably seen this before if you've looked up or studied a little bit of Greek mythology. That idea of you leave coins, sometimes in the mouth, sometimes you see it depicted, I think, as on the eyes. But one way or another, you got to give the dead person some money, right, so that they can get across. So you put a coin somewhere on their body, right, so they can pay the ferryman. Okay. Then you have eo concilio with this purpose. That, right? You have you're setting up a purpose clause here. So you might even say like, namely that when he had come, meaning the dead person had come to the sticks, ad stigem, right? When he had come to the sticks, he was able, Paul said, to pay, right? Solere can mean like to let loose, but here it means to pay the price, the pretium of the crossing, trajectus. Then it continues, and we have this last line. So you have ei autem qui post mortem in terras non sepulti erant, stigem transire non potuerunt, sed in ripa per centum annos errare coacti sunt. Tum demum orcum intrare licebat. So those who, right, ei qui. So, however, right, autem, those who after death, non sepulti errant, they were not buried in terra, in the earth. They were not able, non potuerunt, they're not able to cross the sticks, the stigem, right? So there is this idea of, you need to be buried in the coin, the whole thing. Some people don't make it across, okay? But in Ripa, on the riverbank, for centomanos, for 100 years, coacti, they were sort of forced or compelled to wander, errare, right? So they have to wander around and pay this punishment for not having the right funeral burial is kind of the idea, okay? Then you have tum demum. So then at last, licebat, it was allowed to enter Orcum, right? Orcum intrare. So then finally, at last, they're able to come in. Okay, so this gives you a little bit of insight into sort of the Greek burial customs, the afterlife, the underworld, all these good things that you've probably seen, like I said, mythology or different versions of sort of little variants here and there, but it'll at least give you a chance to learn a little bit more about it if you haven't. So I'd encourage you to do that. And the Latin itself is not too bad. So hopefully you're able to read through this without too much trouble. Again, what you're aiming for is to be able to read through this whole thing without any vocab help, without needing a grammar, a commentary, any vocab, anything like that. That's your sign that you're on the right track and you're ready to move on. Good luck with it.